Usopp is a Tontatta, and not just that, but also another thing that far too many people have missed. So you let me, man on the internet, explain. In chapter 1139, the missionary of love, Skopagaban, stated, "There are many mixed blood races throughout history. The Buccaneers, the Dosandata, the Long Arms and Long Legs, and the Wotans. These blended peoples don't tend to last long, but in every era there have always been those who are more open-minded." And this was the first time that we'd heard this particular race, the Dosandata, said. But it would not be the last, as the question then needed to be asked, well, what exactly are they? A question which was asked in the SBS of volume 112. Question: hello, Oda-san. What are the Dosandata tribe? Are they a tribe of mixed race between giants and dwarves? Answer: quite close. The correct answer is a mixed race between humans and dwarves. The name of the dwarves' tribe, TONTATTA, came from the cute sounds of their footsteps. If you raise that sound volume a bit more, it becomes a Dosandata, and the mixed race between a giant and a dwarf is the Zushin Dodo tribe. They're very rare. So it was not giants and dwarves, it was in fact dwarves and humans. They are the Dosandata. And after discovering this information, the eyes of many men on the internet started to scour the series for any potential Dosandata sightings. And they didn't get very far, because in chapter 41 we see a flashback of Usopp's mother Banchina, whose nose looks suspiciously exactly the same as the noses of the vast majority, but not all, of the Tontatta tribe introduced on Dressrosa. Banchina's nose is even quite different to Usopp's. He's more of a, a long cylinder. That's 2 cylinders, that's a lot of nose. But Banchina has that, more triangular pointy nose. And after creating well over 1,000 named characters, this sort of nose is actually very specific. In fact, long noses in general are very unusual in One Piece. Aside from Usopp, Banchina, and the Tontatta tribe, the only long nose I can think of off the top of my head is Kaku, and Katarina Devon, and Vasco Shot, and Charlotte Perospero, and Arlong, and Foxy, and Charlotte Brule, and Soga King, and Higurashi, and Nisei Usopp, fake fisherman impersonating Usopp in that one game I've forgotten the name of. And lots, let's just say lots. Okay, so long noses aren't anywhere near as rare as I initially thought they were, and yet I haven't even mentioned the big one yet. The big one being Mr. Blackbeard. Oftentimes, what we focus on are Blackbeard's inconsistent teeth, but what we should be focusing on is his wildly inconsistent nose. Pre-time skip, Blackbeard usually, but not always, has a wide, chonksome nose, but post-time skip, his nose has gotten significantly thinner and longer, to the point where he could have a noses-only sword fight with Usopp. So here's the reason why Blackbeard has a long nose, because he's a bad man, and evil characters tend to be given what are considered to be ugly features, like your classic long-nosed witch. That also happens to be why Katarina Devon, Vasco Shot, Perospero, Arlong, Foxy, Kaku, and Brule were given long noses, because they all started their tenure in One Piece as villains and most remain as villains. But look, I'm a lot less interested in all of them because I understand the thematic nature behind those choices. However, what I am very interested in are good characters who are given this feature by Oda, because there is a certain connective tissue that these other characters don't have. All of the people I mentioned just then, what I will say for all of their noses is that they're all their own unique kind of aberrations of nature. They don't follow a uniform schnoz. However, there are characters in One Piece who I immediately thought of when I re-examined the Tontatta style nose, and they would be Mozu and Kiwi of the Frankie family. If you need help telling them apart, Mozu is the one dressed like a kiwi fruit, and Kiwi is the one not dressed like a kiwi fruit. In any case, they have the Banchina nose, also known as the Tontatta nose, and so my proposal would be that Mozu, Kiwi, Banchina, and by genetic association Usopp, may be descendants of the Tontatta tribe. They could be Dosandatas, the mix between humans and dwarves. And with that in mind, Usopp's role on Dressrosa becomes a lot more interesting to examine. The Tontatta tribe have a curious amount in common with Usopp, but in many ways they're also the total opposite of him, particularly when it comes to communication, with Usopp being a prolific liar, whilst the Tontatta go so far as to redefine the word gullible in the fictional pirate dictionary, which makes these two parties a pretty perfect match, because no matter what Usopp says, the Tontatta will believe it without question. For example, when Leo was interrogating Robin in chapter 711, he was adamant that she was lying for about half a second until Robin said, "It's true," and Leo immediately switched his views and made friends with her, because why would anyone lie? And even Robin was shocked at how gullible all the Tontatta Tontatta were, making this a phenomenal Robin face in the process. Plus, there's also a pretty fantastic part where Leo gets captured by Treble and interrogated about his other allies. And after initially refusing to give Treble any names, Treble says, "But he's my friend." What's his name again? And Leo then smiles and names Usopp, or I guess Usoland, thus giving away his friend, because Treble said his friend was his friend, and why would anyone lie? So not only are they gullible, but the Tontatta tribe are probably completely incapable of lying. They are honest to a fault. Again, the opposite of Usopp, and we'll get more into this in a bit. But Usopp's lesson on Dressrosa is less one about bravery and more one of honesty. Usopp's lies began as a defense mechanism, and to this very day he lies and acts all tough in order to conceal his crippling fear, which isn't all that dissimilar to the Tontatta tribe. The Tontatta do mostly rely on trickery to get by. They prefer to stay hidden and take advantage of their speed to deceive targets or opponents into believing that they're dealing with some sort of overwhelming supernatural force, which very much reminds me of Usopp lying about his 8,000 loyal men to project that same sort of power. The difference, I suppose, is that the Tontatta tribe practice a more honest deception, if that makes sense, because the whole reason why they did this right is because the Tontatta tribe made a deal with the Riku dynasty to pretend to be fairies. And with that status, they can acquire, aka steal, any resources they need from Dressrosa. Lying isn't always a bad thing, and in the case of the Tontatta, it is a mutually agreed upon lie that sustained their civilization for 800 years. Whilst the Tontatta, like Usopp, do act tough, but they're quite emotionally weak. They will laugh, cry, get scared, get anything. They will feel absolutely all of the things at the slightest hint of a mood shift or even a false suggestion. Their entire society is quite childish as well. I mean, I don't know, childish might be the wrong word, but they do all have this childlike innocence, and actually, they do all talk like this. Whatever that is. But they remind me so much of Usopp pretending to be a pirate when he was a child on Syrup Village. In fact, before Operation SOP, Leo even gets a packed lunch from his mother, which was very sweet of her. And in further connection to Usopp, the Tontatta tribe also have an affinity for insects, with a legion of rhinoceros beetles and hornets for transport at the Tontatta airport, which Usopp goes crazy for because he loves insects, as does Luffy. And not only that, but Usopp's connection goes a bit deeper because he was trained by Heracles, a man perpetually dressed as a beetle. These small connections are not an accident. Even more so than the giants of Elbaf, who Usopp admires above all others, the Tontatta tribe almost feels like it was designed for Usopp. And so it's very fitting that he goes on to become one of their legendary heroes, as one of the many lies that Usopp tells the tribe is that he is a descendant of their hero Mont Blanc Noland. And I love how Leo mentally pictures Noland. He's the great big person botanist who came to our kingdom 400 years ago. Some bad guys were messing up our island, but he came to the ancestors' side and helped us win the battle. He's a legendary hero to all Tontattas. And as part of this, Leo is shown thinking of Noland as a very stereotypical superhero, much like how Usopp portrays himself in the guise of Soccer King. And not to go too far on this tangent, but one of the other more popular theories about Usopp is that he is the descendant of Noland, just with the inverse effect of Noland, who told the truth but became known as a historical liar, and Usopp, who is a generational talent at lying, somehow mostly being known as a man who always tells the truth because those lies just fatesomely happen to come true. But there's another connection that people don't usually immediately notice, which is that Noland was a botanist, and during the time skip, Usopp primarily studied botany, and now most of his skill set is botany based. And also an even smaller reference to Noland can be found in chapter 740. When Usopp runs away from Treble, he apologizes to the Tontatta tribe and goes on to state, "Oh, I know, I'll write a picture book of your tale for future generations. The Honest Little Tontattas," which is a play on the Lion Noland picture book, which was written about him. And again, Usopp emphasizes the honesty of the Tontattas by juxtaposing it against Noland's honesty. And while these little people had a very little role in a rather bigsome arc, they were originally supposed to be a far larger deal in general. The Tontatta were originally supposed to have their own entire arc, as Green Bit was going to be a story of its own between Punk Hazard and Dressrosa, which is why at the end of Punk Hazard, Trafalgar Law tells Smoker that they're headed to Green Bit instead of just saying Dressrosa, which is the island that hosts Green Bit. However, Oda's editors convinced him to truncate and combine his arc ideas, and that's something that's happened fairly frequently post-time skip. Punk Hazard itself was a result of Oda wanting to do an arc on a fire island and then an ice island, and so they became one. And this next one has never officially been confirmed, but this is my personal speculation, right? I reckon that Whole Cake Island is also a combination of two arc ideas, one for Totterland and Big Mom, and the other for the Germa Kingdom. But the reason why I find this relevant is because Oda initially envisioned that the Tontatta were a race notable enough to have an entire arc constructed around them, just like the Fishmen and just like the Giants. And it should also be noted that the Tontatta conflict historically did not begin with Doflamingo. What Usopp stumbled into was the result of over 900 years of history coming to fruition. Apparently, in the long past, the Tontatta tribe left their home in search of new resources, and actually, I just want to briefly pause on that, because that happens to be the exact same reason why the Moonanites had to leave the moon city of Burka and founded the three sky civilizations on the planet Blue Star. Now, I'm not suggesting that the Tontatta tribe are aliens as well, but I do think it's very interesting that they have the exact same backstory around the exact same time as the Sky People. However, the ancient Tontatta tribe encountered Doflamingo's ancestor Don Quixote, some guy who promised the Tontatta land, resources, and safety in exchange for their labor, which turned out to be lies. Well, all lies except for the labor part. There was lots of labor. That promise was well met, as the Tontatta tribe were enslaved until after the Void Century, when the Don Quixote monarchy promptly abandoned Dressrosa and went to live at the Holy Land of Marijois, after which point the Riku dynasty took over, abolishing slavery and even enacted reparations, which is why the Tontatta tribe can just go and ferry whatever it is they need. However, I would say the biggest difference between the Tontatta tribe and Usopp is that the Tontatta, unlike Usopp, are extremely brave. This is likely in part due to their naivety. They don't quite understand the scale of the danger that they're getting themselves into. But of everyone who launches an attack on Treble and Sugar, Usopp was the only one to run away. And I think that during Dressrosa, it says a lot that these tiny fairy people possess the bravery that Usopp has spent this entire series trying to acquire. And despite the fact that you quite literally need to look down upon them, Usopp found another group of people to look up to. A group of people who, yes, are very small, but extremely powerful for their size. Nobody expects much of them because of how they look and how they sound and how they act and how they everything, but they are capable of packing a serious punch, just like Usopp. And so the main mission of our honest little Tontatta tribe is to rid Dressrosa of its lies. Doflamingo lied to the population about King Riku's actions 10 years ago, and Sugar's powers have caused the island to be continuously gaslit via magical fruit. However, what the Tontatta tribe unwittingly do is place their faith in a liar to dispel these lies, which Usopp does. But in the process, he has to shed his own lies, coming clean about the fact that he is no Usoland, but also adding that, my name is Usopp. Remember that, Tontattas? And if I should die, build me a statue next to Nolan's, because I'm about to become your legendary hero. Usopp tells a lot of lies, especially on Dressrosa, but the biggest lie of all, and look, this is going to sound corny as crap, but the biggest lie of all is his lack of belief in himself. Everyone believes in Usopp except for Usopp himself. After being turned into a toy, Robin is just waiting for Usopp to save her, and as he lay beaten in front of the House of Toys, Frankie is just waiting for Usopp to succeed and start the agreed upon panic that'll save him. Because the truth is that Usopp is a very reliable man, and he did manage to defeat Sugar using the greatest feature of the Tontatta tribe being their unbridled honesty. Sugar knew what the weapon was. Sugar knew who Usopp was. There were no lies. There was no deception happening here, and honesty ended up winning the day. And stupidity. Sugar should not have fed the thing to Usopp. But mostly honesty. And I also want to note that in his defeat of Sugar, Usopp also becomes a hero of the Giants at the same time, as a restored Harudin then raises him into the air and says, "Look closely, warriors. Gaze upon the face of the man who has undone our curse, our hero, and his name is Captain Usopp." And so it's as if Usopp, using the Tontatta philosophy of honesty, allowed him to get a massive step closer to his goal of achieving the bravery of a giant. All by embracing what the point of this video is claiming is his potential Tontatta heritage. And if this did turn out to be true, then I think it would be pretty amazing to look back on Dressrosa as Usopp, a legit Tontatta hero coming back to help his ancestral tribe. However, as always, there is a however, which is that we do actually have one confirmed Dosandata in the series, and that would be Charlotte Normand, the result of Big Mom having very precise and surgical intercourse with a Tontatta. And Normand is interesting because on Dressrosa, the Tontatta tribe were constantly referred to as fairies, and Normand, a Dosandata, does actually dress like a fairy. At least I think she dresses like a fairy. I doubt the wings are real. However, we may have a problem here though, because Charlotte Normand is absolutely teeny tiny despite being half human. And when I say half human, I'm kind of, but not really, because remember that her human half is a Charlotte Lin Lin, who isn't exactly your average sized human. She's a colossal, practically a small giant. And so Charlotte Normand's size, even though she's only 10 years old and will likely grow, is still concerning for this theory. Because if Usopp was a Tontatta descendant and his mother Banchina, then surely they would be much smaller. At the moment, Normand fits in the palm of another child's hand, not even an adult's hand, another child's hand. So for Banchina and Usopp to have this Tontatta lineage, it would need to be quite a few generations back and a very strong human mix. However, there is another very sneaky option that Eiichiro Oda dropped right in front of us, clumsy Oda, as he also specifically named the Zushindora race, the mix of giants and dwarves. One of the rarest races in the One Piece world, and just let me put this out there. What if Usopp was the descendant of not only the Tontatta, also the giants? Usopp could be a Zushindora, which explains both the nose and the human sizing of his mother, and I guess Usopp himself. Because as much as we like to think of One Piece as a story about a bunch of nobody kids who came from nothing setting sail to accomplish crazy dreams, the Straw Hats as a whole tend to be subject to some incredibly fatesome nepotism. Luffy goes without saying, but if Zoro can end up being the descendant of Ryuma, the legendary samurai of Wano, then I don't see why Usopp can't also have some hidden heritage and historical baggage to bring with him into the final war. At the very least, Usopp is very much spiritually a Zushindora. He's been identified by Oda as the weakest member of the Straw Hats, and Oda has stated that he always will be, but he wants to be a brave warrior of the sea and embody the ideals of the giants. So he's got the spirit of a giant in the narratively tiniest body. And while an argument could be made that this would ruin Usopp's role as the distinctly human perspective with nothing really special going on, just sheer will and wit, I think you could also counter that with the Luffy argument, which is that this boy is blessed by fate. But Luffy doesn't know, nor does he care. And even with all of the history behind his existence, Luffy still goes out there and earns each and everything he achieves. And if that can be true of Luffy, then the same can be true of Usopp as well. Especially if, just like Luffy and Zoro, he never finds out. And whilst Usopp already has a statue dedicated to him on Dressrosa, the question now becomes, will this man eventually have a statue dedicated to him on Elbaf as well, fulfilling his legacy of becoming a legendary hero of both races?